So what's the highest amount of damage you can do in Monster Rancher 2? Well, I mean, it's 999. We all know that. That's the max. But imagine the game had no upper limit. What conditions would need to be met to maximize the amount? Who would need to be the attacking monster? Who would need to be the victim? Critical hits can increase damage, sure, but so can stuff like power and reel. And even then, there's so much more at play. For the longest time, a silly hypothetical like this would be hard to accurately answer, mostly because there were a ton of steps needed to be taken first in understanding how the damage formula interacts with everything else. But ponder no more, because luckily for you, I have no life and made a damage calculator for Monster Rancher 2. Be warned, this episode is incredibly math heavy, so if that's not your thing, you know, I got a lot of other stuff that you might like. If we go all the way back to episode 2 of Rancher Rundown, I briefly talk about how guts correction affects damage. If you were to check out the spreadsheet though, all you'd be able to do is plug in the attacker and defender guts rates, and then a sort of arbitrary number called final base damage, where you could then see how much additional damage an attack would do based on you and your opponent's current amount of guts. It's a really fascinating document, but that base damage thing is really weird, right? Like, what does that mean? And the thing is that you need to already completely understand the damage formula in order to gain actual info from the spreadsheet, and in sort of a bastardized catch-22, you also need to understand the spreadsheet in order to get a handle on the damage formula. And while info on the formula was made public thanks to Smiling Faces 96, it flew completely under the radar, and I learned last week that more or less I was the only one who even knew it existed. And what's worse, my understanding of it was also sort of limited because the formula exists only within a larger document that's very hard to read through. I had already extracted the data once to help the Japanese player base who were curious about the numbers, but even then it wasn't as simple as copy and pasting. I ended up having to rewrite the entire formula by hand and revise and simplify, as I found there was these weird variables that were always zero and some other stuff that existed just to make things difficult. After my first round of simplification, the formula looked like this. These are the names of the variables that appear in Smiling Face 96's document. I don't know if this is how they appear internally within the game, but this is how he wrote them out. A-POW is the attacker's power or intelligence stat, whatever it's using to actually do damage. D-POW is the defender's power or intelligence stat, matching whichever one the attacker is attacking with. And D-Def is the defender's defense. So there, great. We can use this to accurately check out damage, right? Well, sort of, I guess. Monster Rancher 2 doesn't care about a monster's exact stats, and when calculating damage it only cares about levels. It's been known for about almost 20 years that 950 power and 999 power are mathematically the same, but if you input 999 attack you'll get one damage value, and if you input 950 you'll get another. What likely happens in the calculation is that these chunks here are floored, so say if you have 950 power and you divide by 50 you'd get 19. If you had 999 power and divided by 50, you'd just chop off all the decimals and round down to 19 as well. But this is a pain in the ass to deal with every time as a person trying to do algebra, even if it's easy for a machine to do. So my second revision of the formula looks like this. I was able to make it much easier to understand after I recognized that these divide by 50 bits in the equation always equal one less than the level of whatever stat it's referencing. 950 is level 20, and 950 divided by 50 is 19. And that led me to the creation of this nifty calculator. We'll be slotting in numbers for our maximum damage experiment along the way as we cover the different things the calculator is capable of telling us. If we're trying to calculate the highest damage possible, it makes sense to give our attacker the maximum amount of power possible, as well as give our opponent level 1 attack and defense. A monster's form, how fat or skinny they are, affects their defense stat, but if they're already at level 1 defense, making them skinny won't add any extra damage, so we can leave that at 0. The calculations column has a lot of numbers and formulas that don't have a lot of meaning on their own, but are necessary to the calculator to function. The first 4 are self-explanatory, but the latter 4 not so much. Base damage is the amount of damage a tech will do if your attacking stat is equal to both your opponent's defense and matching attack stat. So if you have max power and they have max power and defense, this number will be pretty close to what the final damage will be. The damage adjustments kick in when this is not the case and maybe your opponent has no defense, or maybe you've got low power. Multiply them together and divide by 100 to get the final adjusted base damage. It's not particularly useful on its own, but this short formula now gives us a better understanding of what we're looking at in the guts correction spreadsheet. You can see that the bonuses and penalties in guts correction are not linear, and that's due to issues with the game rounding off every single number in the formula. It makes for bizarre jumps and gaps, but the good news is that the spreadsheet exists mostly to display one core concept of Monster Rancher 2. Guts correction does not actually account for your monster's guts rate before 50 guts when it comes to damage and defense. For example, every monster gets the same 16% bonus if they have 45 guts and their opponent has 10 guts. This is the domain of the fast guts rate monster. This is where you want to be as Metalner. Once we hit 50 guts and above though, we can see that the monsters who have an uphill battle getting to this point, those with bad guts regeneration, are disproportionately rewarded for the struggle. If a dragon with 99 guts attacks a Metalner with 99 guts, the dragon does almost double damage. A Metalner with max guts attacking a dragon with the same only does half as much damage as normal. This usually ends up being a theoretical situation in competitive play. You're never going to have 99 guts as a dragon versus Metalner. But this is why it's really important to save up your guts in casual play if you're struggling against computer opponents. Keep in mind that these bonuses and penalties, like everything else in the guts correction formula, are not linear. A strong tech will have a different modifier than a weak tech, but the differences are fairly small, so it's not worth obsessing over. But either way, it's time to slot some more numbers into the calculator for our max damage question. We already have our attacking monster cranked to max output, and we've made our opponent a wet paper bag, so let's look at guts next. It stands to reason to give our monster 99 guts and our opponent 0, so that's what we'll do. It also makes sense to give our monster the slowest guts rate possible to maximize the bonuses, which at 19 means we'll be using a purebred dragon. We'll need to use Dragon's strongest tech, obviously, so we'll use Dragon Combo's absurd 65 force in the calculator. Like mentioned before, if the opponent has less than 50 guts, their guts regen doesn't affect their damage output or defense positively or negatively. Everyone's on an even playing field. And we're going to give this monster 0 guts, obviously. So because we can pick anyone, let's just use my least favorite monster, Undine. Nobody with a forehead that big is nice. They gotta be evil. Oh! Dumping all of these numbers into the calculator gives us a final damage of 4,045, more than 4 times the maximum shown damage. And that's wild, but with a critical hit it brings it all the way up to 6,067. Dragon Combo is powerful, and when combined with Dragon's abysmal guts rate, he has extremely high max damage potential. But it's still not the highest. Golem's Cyclone has an astronomical 78 force, and Golem caps out at 18 guts, which is pretty similar to Dragon's 19. Just for scale, S rank as a designation for the force parameter starts at 50. That's where we find Death Final with Joker. That's already enough to one-shot an opponent with level 1 defense and attack if you have max attack. That's a thing I learned from building this calculator. Cyclone does more damage than Death Final will ever do, even on a crit. This is an astounding amount of damage. With Golem at the helm, a crit from Cyclone with these numbers gives him 6,996 damage. That number is obviously very nice, but we can go even further. Next we have to make him good-natured so he's able to proc the Power Battle Special. This gives him double the offensive power when it's active. With power up, Cyclone can hit for just under 14,000 damage, but we can still go further. In the Joker video I spoke about the Real Battle Special in great detail. If you're unfamiliar with how Real works, go check that out. But the main takeaway here is that when Real wears off, you take double damage. Unfortunately, Real is only available to Joker and Joker subtypes, so that means we can no longer use Undine. But we can beat up on Siren. So here's the grand finale. A Golem with max power, using Cyclone at max guts, with power active, attacking a Siren with 1 defense and power, no stored guts, and who had previously activated Real just for it to wear off, would do 27,984 damage. I apologize for not having a video of this happening in the background. The chance of it happening organically is almost 0, and the chance of me being able to pull it off in a controlled environment is also pretty much 0. It's very unlikely to happen. But we got this in the Monster Rancher Battle League a few months ago, and it's almost as good. 79%, that is going to be a big... Are you serious? Oh my god, that is the most damage I've ever seen that tech do. DX's damage formula is similar but slightly different, and I'll update this to include that eventually. It'll still be close as is, but DX, instead of updating damage and defense every level, now does an update 4 times level in chunks at 12.5 points. So that means every 13 points, then every 12 points, then every 13 points, then every 12 points, and so on and so forth, the damage formula is updated. Finally, there's a reason to go beyond 950 power in the ports. 987 is now your effective maximum. One of the most important things I noticed while putting this video together serves as an addendum. In Rancher Rundown 2, I mentioned that matching your opponent's attack stat with your defense lowers the incoming damage by 25%, and that if you also match their attack with yours, then it lowers the incoming damage by 40. The truth is much more complicated than this. Defense becomes statistically more valuable the higher it is. If you have 500 defense and your opponent has 500 power, you'll reduce the incoming damage by 34%. At 950 defense versus 950 power, it's a 44% reduction. This is significantly better than the 25% I was harping on about, but ultimately it changes nothing. Even at the 44% reduction, defense is still not a viable strategy for 2/3 of the monsters in the game. And speaking of 2/3, that's how much damage you can negate from a maxed stat attacker if both your defense and matching attack stat are maxed. Your offensive stat reduces damage at the rate of half of that of your defense, so while it's not particularly significant, it explains why a speed-based monster with no defense and max power tends to only take about 80% damage from an opponent with maxed power. While 66% damage reduction is notably more than the 50% I discussed, and defense is stronger than we first thought, nothing here really shakes up the meta. Everything functioned the way it did with incorrect intel, and learning defense is actually better than originally thought is more heartbreaking than anything, because it's still bad. If you like these videos, then commenting or liking the video really helps me with the algorithm, so that's the easiest thing you can do to support. I also stream 3 days a week, so come check me out on Twitch. And finally, thank you to my Patreons. I was really nervous about setting up a Patreon with such a small following, but you guys are the best. This video marks the beginning of a kind of insane upload schedule I've set up for myself with the release of DX looming around the corner. I've got 2 more videos coming out before the release, and 2 additional videos for beginners dropping when DX does. The next month is going to be insane, so I hope you're ready for more Monster Rancher videos. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in 2 weeks? Fuck, that's soon.